The uninvited visitor. This happened sometime in the late 80s or early 90s when I was about 6 or 7 years old. My older sister, who I'll call Rachel, was around 15 at the time. We grew up in a small town in the Southwest, the kind of place where everybody seemed to know everybody else. My parents regularly left me home with Rachel in the evenings, but because of the age difference between us, we actually got along pretty well. One winter night, we were home alone watching TV. It was probably around 8 p.m., but it was already completely dark outside and freezing cold. Our living room was at the center of the house, and that was where the only TV was. We were watching one of those hour-long true crime programs like 48 Hours or 60 Minutes that were everywhere back then. I can't remember exactly which one, but the episode was about a seemingly normal, quiet man who had suddenly attacked a neighboring family and disappeared with their young daughter. Authorities were still searching for him. Perfect viewing material for 2 kids home alone. There was something else about our living room that suddenly became very relevant. One entire wall consisted of large windows and a glass door leading to the backyard. If the outside light wasn't on, and that night it wasn't, you couldn't see anything through the glass except pitch black darkness and your own reflection. The front door was on the opposite side of the room, just beyond a small entryway. Unlike the back door, it was solid, with a separate storm door on the outside. We were about 45 minutes into the TV show when someone, or something, pounded violently on the front door. Rachel and I practically jumped out of our skin. Then everything went completely silent. The house was mostly dark. The only real light came from the kitchen farther down the hall and the flickering television in front of us. After the initial panic wore off, we started trying to convince ourselves there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. We had a rocking chair and some planters on the front porch, and the winds where we lived could get incredibly strong. Maybe something had blown over and hit the door. A minute or 2 passed. Nothing happened. We were just beginning to relax when we heard something that instantly destroyed that explanation. The storm door closed. Someone had opened it, which meant someone had been standing on our porch. Rachel and I froze. Neither of us wanted to move toward the front door to look outside. Instead, Rachel slowly crawled over to the television and switched it off. This was an old TV with a physical metal dial, and turning it off produced a surprisingly loud thunk. Now the living room was almost completely dark. Rachel stayed crouched beside the television while I sat frozen on the floor. We kept looking at each other, then back toward the front door. I don't know how much time passed. It might have been 30 seconds. It might have been several minutes. Then I turned around. Behind me was that wall of black windows and the glass door leading into the backyard. Then I watched the doorknob begin to turn. The door was locked, thankfully, but only with the lock built into the knob. The deadbolt wasn't engaged. The handle moved again, very gently. Someone was testing it. Neither of us made a sound. Then suddenly, the entire door began violently shaking. Someone was yanking it back and forth, apparently trying to force it open. The whole wall of windows vibrated with every pull. I could see my faint reflection in the glass becoming blurry, then clear, then blurry again as the windows shook. That was when Rachel completely lost it. She screamed, grabbed me off the floor, and practically dragged me down the hallway into her bedroom. She slammed the bedroom door and started piling anything she could move in front of it, including her mattress. Thankfully, she'd also remembered the cordless phone. And I mean an old cordless phone, one of those enormous beige plastic bricks with a long metal antenna. The problem was that our area didn't have the 911 emergency calling system we have today. We had to call the local sheriff's department directly, and in her panic, Rachel couldn't remember the number. So she hit redial. One of her friends answered. Between gasps, Rachel told her that someone was trying to get into our house and that they needed to get an adult over there immediately. I remember sitting curled up on the bedroom floor, shaking so badly I couldn't stop. After that, we heard nothing. No more pounding, no footsteps, nothing at the windows. We stayed barricaded inside the bedroom until headlights finally appeared outside. Rachel's friend had arrived with her parents. We never found out who had been outside of our house that night. There weren't any obvious signs of a break-in attempt afterward. We noticed a couple of scuff marks near the bottom of the back door, but no one could remember whether they'd already been there. Maybe it was someone just trying to scare us. Maybe it was someone who had the wrong house. Maybe there was some completely innocent explanation that we never discovered. But someone definitely opened that storm door, and someone definitely tried the handle of our back door. Nothing like it ever happened again to either of us. But more than 3 decades later, there's one habit neither of us managed to break. We always lock our doors. The farmer. My mother-in-law, Linda, was one of those people everyone loved being around. She was funny, warm, and incredibly close with my wife, Emily. Linda passed away when our son was only about 4 months old. He was far too young to have any real memories of her. A few years later, when our son was around 3, we were living in an old craftsman-style house built sometime in the 1930s. One night, I was giving him a bath when I noticed him staring over my shoulder. It wasn't the absent-minded staring toddlers sometimes do. His eyes seemed fixed on something behind me, as though he was actually watching someone. After a few seconds, he asked me a strange question. "Why does Grandma call Mommy a funny name?" At first, I assumed he meant my mother, so I asked him what he was talking about. Then he said the name. The nickname was Mimi. I just stared at him. Mimi was a childhood nickname Linda had given my wife when she was little. It was something only her mother called her. My wife and I never used it around the house, and as far as we knew, our 3-year-old son had never heard it. I asked him where he'd learned that name. His answer was even stranger. "The farmer told me." I asked him who the farmer was. He simply said, "He's my friend." Later that night, I told Emily what happened. The nickname immediately brought her to tears. Neither of us could figure out how our son possibly knew it. We talked about it for a while, marveled at how strange it was, and eventually moved on. Then came the following weekend. Emily was working, and I was home alone with our son. He was playing in his bedroom when I heard him talking. At first I assumed he was playing with toys, but after listening for a moment, it sounded much more like one side of a conversation. "Yes? No? I don't know that." Then he laughed. I walked into his bedroom and asked what he was doing. "Just playing." "Who are you playing with?" "The farmer." By this point, I'll admit, I was getting a little uncomfortable. I asked him where the farmer was. "He left when you came in." That was not the answer I wanted to hear. When my wife came home, I told her what had happened. Now both of us were unsettled. Still, he was 3 years old. 3-year-olds have imaginary friends. They say bizarre things. We decided not to make a big deal out of it. If something else happened, we'd figure out what to do then. A few nights later, something else happened. My wife and I woke during the night and heard our son talking in his bedroom. Then we clearly heard him say, "Grandma says you and I can't be friends anymore." We both got up and went into his room. He was sitting upright in bed. I asked if he was okay. He seemed completely fine. Then he explained, "Grandma says I can't play with the farmer anymore." And that was it. Our son never mentioned the farmer again. Not once. He's a teenager now, and we've asked him about it over the years. He doesn't remember the farmer. He doesn't remember the conversations. He doesn't remember saying any of it. Maybe the farmer was simply an imaginary friend, and the nickname was something he'd overheard without us realizing it. Maybe there was a perfectly ordinary explanation for all of it. But my wife and I remember exactly what happened, and we've never been able to explain how a 3-year-old boy knew the private childhood nickname used by a grandmother he'd never been old enough to remember. Or why, after Grandma apparently told him to stop playing with the farmer disappeared for good. An unlikely resident. Years ago, I worked at a nursing home. Like most nursing facilities, hours could feel very different depending on the time of day. During daylight hours, it was busy and noisy. Televisions playing, meal carts rolling through the halls, staff moving from room to room, families coming and going. At night, it was another place entirely. The hallways became quiet. Most of the lights were dimmed. You'd hear the occasional call bell, the hum of equipment, or a television playing behind a closed door. I'd worked enough shifts there that none of this bothered me, and I certainly didn't believe the building was haunted. Then residents started telling me about the little boy. The first incident happened while I was helping an elderly woman get somewhere in the building. We reached the elevator, the doors opened, and suddenly she refused to step inside. I asked her what was wrong. She looked into the elevator and told me she was scared. Scared of what? I asked. The little boy, she replied. I looked inside for myself. The elevator was empty, of course. I assumed she'd become confused or perhaps mistaken. There might be a reflection of someone standing inside, but there were no mirrors or reflective surfaces in the elevator. Confusion wasn't unusual in a nursing home, so I didn't think much of it. Not long afterward, however, something similar happened with another resident. A man came out of his room and stopped me in the hallway. "Do you have any candy?" he asked. I told him I didn't. "Oh, it's for the little boy. He likes it." That got my attention. 2 residents had now independently mentioned seeing a child. There weren't any children staying at the facility, obviously, and there hadn't been any young visitors recently. My mother also worked at the nursing home. She was a charge nurse and had been there for over a decade, so one day I finally asked her about it. "What's going on with this little boy everyone keeps talking about?" I expected her to laugh. She didn't. Instead, she looked at me like I'd finally stumbled onto something everyone who'd worked there long enough eventually learned about. Residents had been reporting sightings of this little boy for years. Not constantly. Sometimes months would pass without anyone mentioning him. Then suddenly, someone would see him. The strange part was that the reports didn't come exclusively from residents with dementia or other cognitive problems. Residents who were completely alert and oriented reported seeing him too. And despite these people having different backgrounds, different medical conditions, and living in different parts of the building, their descriptions were remarkably similar. He was young. He had very dark, almost black hair. He liked to play. And apparently, he liked candy. Some residents said he would appear in their room. Others saw him in hallways or near the elevator. My mother told me something else that made the story even harder to dismiss. The nursing home hadn't always been in that building. At some point during her years working there, the facility relocated. New building, new rooms, new hallways. Same residents, mostly, and some of the same staff. And according to them, the little boy moved with them too. Reports of him continued at the new facility. The same stories, the same description. There was another strange detail too. For whatever reason, residents with poor eyesight seemed especially likely to encounter him. The boy supposedly told residents that he lived outside in a tent. He also told them how he had died. A tree had fallen on him. Whether any of that corresponded to an actual child or an actual event, I have no idea. I couldn't find anything. Maybe residents overheard other residents talking about him. Maybe the story spread around the facility without anyone realizing it. That's the explanation I preferred. Because up until that point, I'd never experienced anything myself. But that changed the following night. I was caring for a woman who had recently suffered a stroke. She'd lost the use of her right hand and needed complete assistance during meals, so I was sitting beside her, feeding her one bite at a time. Then I felt something touch my arm. A small, distinctly cold hand wrapped around my arm for just a moment. Before I could even process what I'd felt, the woman looked past me. Her expression changed as if she'd just noticed someone standing there beside us. Then she smiled. "Is that your boyfriend?" I didn't answer. She continued looking at the empty space beside me. Then she began to laugh. "He looks a little young for you." Every hair on my body stood up. I whipped around, and of course, there was nobody there. I finished with her meal, but I couldn't stop thinking about that cold hand, or about the fact that she had apparently seen a young boy standing beside me at the exact moment I felt it. I told myself there had to be an explanation. These kinds of things aren't actually real. Maybe she had been confused. Maybe I'd imagined the touch. But there was one final detail that has stayed with me ever since. The woman I'd been feeding, the one who looked beside me and joked about my unusually young boyfriend, passed away later that same night. I don't know who the little boy was. I don't know whether there ever really was a child who lived in a tent and died beneath a falling tree. And I can't explain why residents, who seemingly had nothing in common, kept describing the same dark-haired boy over the course of so many years. But after that night, whenever a resident mentioned seeing a little boy in the hallway, I believed them.